Hello, Troy A. Shadowing Tronics, taking part in the Art Soundoff challenge again. Um, so, a couple of the guys who created and host or sponsor, however you want to call it, the Art Soundoff, Jersey Droz and Rob Stenzinger, are not chiefly talking about comics in their Art Soundoffs this year. Rob's been talking about game design, which is another thing that he does. Jersey has been using the opportunity to put together an audiobook about how to make a successful comic workshop because in his civilian identity he actually takes and creates comics, but he also does comic workshops and teaches other people how to make comics. So I thought it might be interesting to talk about a bit about the things that I do besides comics, especially since this week, Friday to be exact, is the anniversary of BW Media Spotlight. I've been doing it for 10 years. It will be 10 years on Friday, which is the longest I think I've given any project that hasn't been forced on me by the government. I'm talking about school, not prison or anything. Don't do that. Although, frankly, school felt like a prison, but that's a whole other conversation. So, I thought I'd start off. What I want to do this week is talk about how I do all that, and it will include comics because that's one of the projects I do. I do 3 projects. I do articles, comics, and videos. And I do reviews, commentaries, and the occasional interview. That's kind of all put in there. So I want to talk about that stuff this week, but but today, to start off, I thought I would explain how this all got started. And it actually began in middle school. Well, because that's I've always been kind of drawn to writing and drawing and whatever. I was spelling words at 2.5, or so I'm told. I was not really paying as much attention. But one day I saw, or I had seen some of my schoolmates in homeroom in middle school, and they were taking paper, folding it in half, and making it, and then making their own comic books. It looked like fun, so I kept doing it. So I decided to do it too, and I kept doing it until I was out of high school. Never really selling anything because I didn't think anything was good enough to sell. I've never been happy with my art. I mean, if you've seen some of my previous art sound-offs, where I've shown you some of the old work that I did, you kind of understand why. So anyway, and then I started doing the things in Notebook. Now, when I was making these little comics, I wanted to make my own little comic company name, and I went through a few of them. I went with DCE. It's DC Comics, but with an E on it. Why? I don't know. Earthly Comics. Why? I don't know. Troy A. Presents. Why? Because that's my name. But eventually settled on BW Comics. And the reason for that, because I was doing these in homeroom and study hall, and when I'd gotten my work done and I was waiting for everyone else, for other people to catch up, I obviously didn't have access to coloring pencils unless I was home. And I did a few at home too. But I mean, they were all in black and white. So one day I'm looking through the TV Guide. Now, for you kids out there, TV Guide used to be more of a, I guess you'd call it a manga-sized book, and it featured full television listings. This was before the internet, so you couldn't just look up what shows when. It was before your cable company or satellite company would have a guide on the screen that you could scroll through and find out what's coming up next. So it would give you a whole week's worth of when the stations were intending to show a particular program. And they always had this little mark in there that just said BW. And I kind of wondered what that meant. I was a kid. And I looked it up, and BW stood for black and white. So they were old black and white shows and old black and white movies. And that was perfect. So I'm making black and white comics. Let's call it BW Comics. And even though at one point I did the Troy A Presents, I pretty much was BW Comics. That was the name I slapped on. That's the name I used. Flash forward to 2008, and I'm in the hospital. Sadly, this would not be the last year I took multiple trips to the hospital. But this is the one where I was first diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And so I took I should have blown my nose before I started this. So I'm home recovering, and I'm reading all these other blogs about comics. I'm reading comic coverage. Comics should be fun. Slay Mush about it, the Deep, Siskoid's blog of geekery, the Invincible Super blog. And at some point I found myself writing like 2 or 3 paragraphs in the comments about these stories, things that were bugging me, things that I liked. And I was like, well, why don't I just go ahead and start my own website? And so I did. And I was trying to figure out a name for it. Well, of course, I still had the BW branding from doing the comics, doing the notebook comics, and doing the Full of Fulton comics. And I was starting to get back into comics again, thanks to Art and Story, the podcast that Jersey was on before Lean to Artcast. And that got me interested in starting to make comics again. And I thought BW would be a good branding for the site. I first considered calling it BW Media Showcase, but I eventually settled on BW Media Spotlight. I think there were probably a couple other names that I thought up. But eventually BW Media Spotlight was what I came up with, because I was spotlighting storytelling media. And as far as why I do it, I'm going to save that for Friday. But that's basically the history of BW Comics, BW Media Spotlight, how I got into comics. And what I'm going to do for the rest of this week is talk about the creation of articles, comics, and videos, and just kind of briefly go over what it takes to put these things together. So we'll start on that tomorrow as we start talking about how I do articles. And if you'd like to see some of those articles, you can go to bwspotlight.com, and they're all up there. If you want to hear other people taking part in the Art Soundoff Challenge, then go to Twitter and look for the hashtag #ArtSoundoff. The participants should all be using it. And if you want to take part in Art Soundoff yourself, go to artsoundoff.com. It'll tell you how to set up your own Art Soundoff. Doesn't matter when you do it. You can do it anytime this month. One person actually did it in January, Fway Storm, FWAH Storm. Look him up on YouTube. He's got a lot of interesting stuff on there, and he's given me shout-outs a couple of times, so here's one back at you. And so tomorrow we'll talk about making articles, and until then, I wish you all happy creating.